The sharp clink of a silver spoon against a crystal champagne flute instantly silenced the private dining room of the Sovereign Club. Overhead, a cascading chandelier cast a cold, fractured light across the mahogany table. Eleanor, my mother-in-law, sat at the head of the table like a judge presiding over a tribunal. With a manicured hand, she slid a manila envelope toward me. It stopped perfectly next to my plate of untouched sea bass. "Go ahead. Open it," Eleanor commanded. Her voice was a perfectly calibrated weapon, polite enough for high society but laced with absolute venom. I pulled the tab. 3 glossy photographs spilled out. They were taken from a distance, showing me handing a paper coffee cup to a man on a rainy sidewalk. The man was Mark, my ex-boyfriend from 5 years ago. A brief, meaningless encounter that lasted exactly 2 minutes. A gold digger and a cheat, Eleanor announced to the room, making sure the 2 private waiters heard her before dismissing them with a flick of her wrist. "I always knew you were gutter trash from the moment David brought you into our immaculate home. A freelance data entry clerk. What an absolute joke. You married my son to leech off our generational wealth, and now you are sleeping around with your pathetic past." I did not gasp. I did not defend myself. I simply picked up my water goblet. The condensation chilled my fingertips, grounding me. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The ice clinked against the glass. My husband, David, sat across from me. He nervously adjusted his silk tie and refused to meet my eyes. He stared blankly at his Wagyu steak, a spineless man hiding comfortably behind his mother's designer skirt. "David is filing for divorce," Eleanor continued, adjusting her diamond-encrusted Rolex. "And since we have an ironclad prenuptial agreement protecting our family assets, you will leave with absolutely nothing. Pack your cheap little bags and get out of our estate by midnight." Our estate. The phrase echoed quietly in my mind. She was referring to the $6.2 million modern Mediterranean villa in the exclusive gated community of Rosewood. The villa that my holding company, Apex Horizon Capital, purchased in cash 3 years ago and graciously leased to David's startup for a microscopic, symbolic fraction of its true market value. Under the table, out of their line of sight, I unlocked my phone. I bypassed my messages and opened my private Swiss banking application. The screen illuminated a stark white number, $112,480,955.20. I locked the screen. I didn't need a single cent of their debt-ridden money. I literally owned the ground they slept on. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Eleanor sneered, leaning forward. The suffocating scent of her Tom Ford perfume filled the space between us. I placed my glass down. The soft thud resonated in the tense silence. "No," I said. My tone was entirely flat, an objective delivery of facts devoid of the hysterical panic she so desperately wanted to consume. "I will be out by midnight." David finally looked up, his jaw dropping in surprise at my total surrender. He expected screaming. He expected me to fall to my knees and beg for mercy. Instead, I stood up. The legs of my heavy oak chair scraped softly against the polished marble floor. I picked up my faded canvas tote bag, a jarring contrast to the $25,000 Hermes Birkin resting proudly on Eleanor's chair. "Good," Eleanor smirked, taking a triumphant sip of her vintage Dom Perignon. "Leave the keys to the Mercedes G-Wagon on the kitchen counter. It belongs to the family." "Of course," I replied calmly. I did not mention that the G-Wagon was registered to a ghost LLC I created solely for tax purposes. More importantly, I did not mention the dual-lens 4K dashcam with ultra-wide internal cabin recording and 5G cloud syncing that I had personally installed last week. As I walked out of the dining room, my low heels clicking in a steady, unbothered rhythm against the stone hallway, I pulled out my phone again. I did not shed a single tear. I opened the encrypted cloud storage application linked directly to the G-Wagon security system. If Eleanor wanted to play a ruthless game of surveillance and secrets, I was going to show her exactly what real, unblinking surveillance looked like. The trap was set. The lenses were active. I just had to wait for the notifications to roll in. I returned to the Rosewood Villa strictly to pack my single, scuffed canvas suitcase. The $6.2 million estate, legally deeded to my holding company, smelled overwhelmingly of industrial bleach. Eleanor had already ordered the housekeeping staff to deeply sanitize the master bedroom. actively erasing my 5-year existence from the premises. David was sitting in the mahogany-paneled study, hiding behind a crystal decanter of scotch. He did not look up when I walked past the open double doors, a spineless heir terrified of losing his allowance. I walked into the kitchen, a sprawling masterpiece of imported Italian marble. I pulled the heavy, metallic keys to the 2024 Mercedes G-Wagon from my pocket and dropped them onto the island. The sharp, resonant clack echoed through the high-vaulted ceilings. "Make sure she doesn't steal any of the silverware," Eleanor's voice floated down from the grand staircase. I ignored her. I walked out into the biting night air, my cheap sneakers crunching against the crushed gravel driveway, and stepped into my waiting Uber Black. I gave the driver a single destination: the apex pinnacle. 20 minutes later, a retinal scan granted me access to the private, high-speed elevator of the city's most exclusive 50-story residential tower. The doors slid silently open, revealing my true sanctuary, a $14.5 million, 6,000-square-foot penthouse completely hidden from David and his pretentious family. I walked across the heated Brazilian walnut floors, shrugging off my faded denim jacket. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic, glittering view of the financial district. The city looked like a circuit board of power, and I held the master switch. I poured exactly 2 fingers of a rare 25-year, Old Macallan single malt into a heavy glass. Before I could take the first sip, my phone vibrated intensely against the obsidian quartz countertop. It was a high-priority push notification from my encrypted Blackview cloud security application. Alert: motion and audio detected. Camera: interior cabin, Mercedes G-Wagon. Timestamp: 11:45 del pomeriggio. I unlocked my iPad Pro and opened the live feed. The 4K infrared lens pierced the darkness of the G-Wagon's luxurious leather interior with brutal clarity. The passenger door swung open. Eleanor slipped inside, her expensive cashmere coat rustling loudly against the sensitive microphone. She was giggling a sickening, high-pitched sound of pure adolescent thrill that completely shattered her icy high society persona. Then, the driver's side door opened. A man slid behind the leather steering wheel. The camera locked onto his face. It was Mark, my supposedly secret lover. The exact same ex-boyfriend Eleanor had just used to ruthlessly frame me for infidelity. I increased the volume on the iPad. The audio waveform spiked violently on my screen. "You handled the little gutter trash perfectly, my brilliant queen," Mark purred smoothly, leaning across the center console to passionately kiss my mother-in-law. Eleanor laughed, tossing her $25,000 Birkin bag into the backseat. David swallowed the whole story like a gullible little boy. "The divorce papers are fast-tracked. We keep the villa, the cars, and the company assets. And you, my darling boy, get your promised $50,000 wire transfer tomorrow morning for taking those staged coffee shop photos." I did not throw my glass against the wall. I did not shed a single tear of betrayal. I simply smiled a cold, mechanical stretching of my lips in the silent penthouse. I tapped export 4K video and immediately backed the file up to 3 separate offshore servers. Then, I opened my secure laptop. It was time to pull the financial strings. I logged into the master portal of Apex Horizon Capital. With a few precise keystrokes, I drafted an immediate 24-hour eviction notice for the Rosewood Villa, citing a critical breach of morality and lease terms. Next, I accessed the DMV database, officially flagging the Mercedes G-Wagon as a stolen corporate asset. The trap had perfectly clamped shut. Now, I just needed to watch them bleed. At exactly 9 a.m. the next day, the tranquil morning of the Rosewood gated community was abruptly shattered by the rhythmic, strobe-like flashing of red and blue LED lights. I sat comfortably in the plush, heated leather seat of a chauffeured, armored Cadillac Escalade, parked discreetly under the shade of a massive oak tree down the street from the $6.2 million villa. I watched through the heavy, bullet-resistant tinted window as 2 county sheriff's cruisers aggressively blocked the immaculate driveway. My iPad Pro rested on my lap, streaming a live 4K feed from the estate's external security cameras, a top-tier surveillance grid David never knew my company had installed. Eleanor marched out the grand front double doors, furiously clutching her imported silk robe, a half-empty crystal flute of mimosa in her right hand. David trailed nervously behind her, looking confused, bleary-eyed, and severely hungover. "What is the absolute meaning of this?" Eleanor screeched, her shrill voice clipping the estate's hidden microphone. Do you have any idea who we are? Move those hideous vehicles off my property immediately. A tall, broad-shouldered officer stepped forward, his hand resting casually on his utility belt. The heavy metal of his handcuffs clinked softly. Ma'am, we are responding to a high-priority felony grand theft auto report for the 2024 Mercedes G-Wagon currently parked in your garage. It was officially reported stolen at midnight by the registered corporate owner, Apex Horizon Capital. That is my family's vehicle, David stammered, his face flushing a furious, ugly red. My wife. My ex-wife left the keys on the kitchen counter last night. We own it. The Department of Motor Vehicles database says otherwise, sir, the officer replied coldly, tapping his digital notepad. You have no legal claim to the asset. Right on cue, a sleek black Mercedes Sprinter van pulled smoothly into the driveway, bypassing the police cruisers. Two men in crisp, $5,000 bespoke charcoal suits stepped out. They were my senior corporate litigators. The lead attorney approached Eleanor with predatory grace and handed her a thick, legally bound manila envelope. Eleanor and David Sterling, the attorney stated, his voice completely devoid of emotion. You are hereby served with an immediate, non-negotiable 24-hour eviction notice for this property. The legal title holder, Apex Horizon Capital, has permanently terminated your subsidized residential lease due to a critical breach of the morality clause and suspected financial fraud. Eleanor's fingers went numb. She dropped her mimosa. The expensive crystal glass shattered into 100 jagged pieces against the imported Italian cobblestone. The orange liquid fizzled pathetically into the dirt. Apex Horizon. That is $1 billion international holding company. Who in the world authorized this action? I tapped the intercom button on my Escalade's rear door panel. The driver shifted gears and smoothly pulled the massive SUV forward, parking it directly in front of the shattered glass. The motorized rear window rolled down with a soft, expensive, mechanical hum. I did not step out. I simply looked down at them from the elevated, climate-controlled cabin. I was wearing a tailored $4,200 Brunello Cucinelli cashmere blazer, finally shedding my thrift store disguise. I authorized it, I said. My voice sliced through the crisp morning air, flat, absolute, and utterly lethal. David blinked rapidly, his jaw slacking as his brain struggled to process the armored vehicle, the ruthless corporate lawyers, and the sudden, terrifying shift in my aura. You're a freelance data entry clerk. How are you in that car? I didn't answer his pathetic, trembling question. Explanations were for equals, and we were no longer equals. Instead, I pressed a single button on my iPad and turned the 12.9-inch Retina screen toward them. I maximized the volume to 100%. The crystal clear, digitally enhanced audio of Mark's voice echoed loudly across the driveway, cutting sharply over the low rumble of the idling police engines. You handled the little gutter trash perfectly, my brilliant queen. You get your promised $50,000 wire transfer tomorrow morning for taking those staged coffee shop photos. Eleanor's face drained of all color, turning a sickening, ashen gray. The haughty, untouchable aristocratic mask melted away in an instant, leaving only the terrified, trembling face of a completely exposed fraud. David stared at his mother, his eyes widening in pure, unfiltered horror as the 4K infrared video of her passionately kissing his wife's supposed secret lover played in a merciless, undeniable loop. David stood completely paralyzed, his expensive leather loafers rooted to the imported cobblestone. The iPad screen reflected off his widened, bloodshot eyes. "Mom?" he whispered, his voice cracking violently under the crushing weight of the revelation. You paid him? You slept with him in our own driveway just to frame my wife?" Eleanor's manicured hands shook uncontrollably. The $25,000 Birkin bag slipped from her sweaty grasp, tumbling onto the hard driveway next to the shattered crystal flute. "David, darling, I did it to protect our family wealth. I swear. I didn't know she was the CEO of Apex Horizon. I didn't know." She turned her desperate, tear-streaked face toward my armored Escalade, completely abandoning her high society grace. "Please. We are family. I made a terrible, foolish mistake. I will return the $50,000 wire transfer immediately. Just stop the eviction." Call off your corporate lawyers. Stop the police. If you take this estate, we have absolutely nothing. David's tech startup is functionally bankrupt without your heavily subsidized lease. I didn't blink. I adjusted the lapel of my $4,200 cashmere blazer and looked down at her with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a failed, pathetic experiment. You didn't make a mistake, Eleanor, I stated, my tone perfectly steady and utterly devoid of empathy. You executed a meticulously calculated, malicious strategy to systematically destroy a woman you thought was poor and defenseless. You proudly relied on an ironclad prenuptial agreement to leave me completely destitute on the streets. Fortunately, that exact same legal contract dictates that what is strictly mine remains mine. The villa, the luxury vehicles, and the microscopic startup capital I secretly injected into David's failing company all belong to my corporate entity. Please. David finally broke, taking a pathetic, desperate step forward before my senior attorney physically blocked his path with a stiff, unyielding arm. I didn't know what she did behind my back. I never wanted this. We can fix this. I love you. You loved the illusion of control. I corrected him smoothly, the cold truth slicing through his delusion. And you loved your mother's allowance significantly more than you ever respected your marriage. My legal team has already filed the final divorce papers, officially superseding yours, heavily citing extensive financial fraud and deliberate defamation. I pressed a sleek silver button on the door panel, rolling up the tinted, bullet-resistant window. You have exactly 24 hours to vacate my property. The sheriff's deputies will wait here until my stolen vehicle is secured. Have a very pleasant morning. The heavy glass sealed shut with a soft, impenetrable click. I simply nodded to my driver. The massive V8 engine of the Escalade roared to life, rolling smoothly away. I left Eleanor openly sobbing on the cold driveway, while David stared blankly into the terrifying abyss of his own shattered privilege. True power is never found in the loudness of one's arrogance, nor is it measured by the designer labels draped across empty souls. It resides in the quiet confidence of knowing exactly who you are, especially when the world insists you are nothing. We live in a society obsessed with superficial facades, where kindness is frequently mistaken for weakness, and humility is often treated as an open invitation for disrespect. But the universe operates on an uncompromising ledger of cause and effect. When you strip away the gold-plated illusions and the inherited privileges, all that remains is the raw architecture of your character. Those who build their empires on the fragile foundations of deceit and cruelty will eventually watch them crumble under the crushing weight of their own hubris. In the end, the ultimate revenge is not a chaotic explosion of anger, but the cold, meticulous execution of boundaries, walking away with your integrity fully intact.